Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Lamar Waldron. He is the author of numerous books. For some reason, I don't have it on my one sheet here. But Lamar, what are the titles of your most recent books?
Well, the most recent book is The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination. And our other books, the last one I wrote with you was called Legacy of Secrecy.
Right. Okay. And Sunday, if I have it right, or was it Monday, was JFK's 100th birthday?
It was actually yesterday. Monday was the 100th birthday of JFK, and there were people probably saw a lot of articles. I know there's a big new exhibit of 100 personal items up at a place you've been before, the JFK Presidential Library up in Boston, and so he's in the news a lot right now.
Yeah. So who killed Kennedy?
Well,
and why?
It's easy to look at that and talk about it. A big problem is a lot of the files about the people that killed Kennedy are still being kept secret today. So the people that killed JFK were three Mafia bosses: Carlos Marcello of Louisiana and Texas, Santo Trafficante, who controlled much of Florida, including Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. And all of those three gentlemen made credible confessions, confessions that historians, many of them and investigators consider credible because it was done late in life to trusted associates, to for no kind of financial gain. They thought these confessions would never be made public. However, the FBI and other agencies have done a really, really good job of keeping their confessions and the information about them secret from the American public and from Congress, who has even investigated JFK's assassination and passed a law that required all of these files to be released. But luckily, because James Comey got fired by President Trump, we're now facing a situation where in the coming weeks, there will be Senate confirmation hearings about the new FBI director, whoever that might be, and let's hope it's somebody good. And so this is a chance for senators to ask any questions they would like of the new nominee to be FBI director. But it's also a chance for your listeners and all U.S. citizens to talk to or communicate with or pressure their senators, whether they're on the Judiciary Committee. I believe it's the Judiciary Committee that would be holding the hearings. But, of course, the Senate's very different from the House. The Senate is a much more collegial, friendly body, usually, except where Elizabeth Warren is concerned sometimes with the Republican leadership. And so this is a chance for people to communicate with their senators to make sure that the people on that Judiciary Committee to say, look, for 53 years, the FBI has been hiding crucial files about JFK's murder and these confessions and the people who confessed and the people who helped them from the American public and from Congress. And will you, Mr. Nominee for FBI Director, commit to obey the law and release those files? There's even an official list that was kept secret during the 50th anniversary of JFK's murder just a few years ago, back in, I guess it's been 2013 now. And the reason it was kept secret, I think, is because when it was finally released earlier this year, and I want to credit another writer named Russell Baker with posting that full list online on his website, we saw that most of the crucial files that you and I have been looking for more than 30 years were not even on that list, even though some of those files are discussed, and the fact that they are still withheld is on other parts of the National Archives website. So we have this unusual situation where all this information, after 53 years after JFK was murdered, is still being kept secret by the FBI and other agencies, and yet we do have this window of opportunity in the coming weeks to release some of these incredibly important files.
So if the FBI knew that Marcello, Trafficante, and Roselli, the three of America's most powerful mobsters, murdered John Kennedy, number one, why did they kill Kennedy? And number two, why did Lyndon Johnson sit Earl Warren down and say, son, you got to cover this thing up?
Well, getting Earl Warren, who was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, to be on a commission while Jack Ruby, the man who shot the accused assassin, while the accused assassin was in police custody and on live television that I watched as a kid when I was playing hooky from church that morning pretending to be sick. Earl Warren knew that Jack Ruby's case could reach the Supreme Court. And if he's on this commission that's investigating Ruby and Oswald and any possible connections, that could be a constitutional crisis because he would have to recuse himself. Then, any decision, could split. So this could be horrible. But LBJ said, look, millions of lives are at stake. And we have this information now. This has eventually been declassified, and it's been discussed by LBJ's President Johnson's biographers. He basically said it could be World War III because the initial, the FBI wasn't stupid. They didn't just kill somebody and let the chips fall where they may. They had done that back in the early 1950s when the Mafia, some of these same mobsters, had the Attorney General-elect of Alabama assassinated because he ran on an anti-mob platform. And he was assassinated in Phoenix City, Alabama, the most corrupt city in America. Right across from huge Fort Benning, Georgia. And that was bad because the Eisenhower-Nixon administration basically ignored the Mafia as much as they could. You couldn't ignore a state attorney general-elect being assassinated. So Eisenhower was forced, against what they usually did, to send in the army to declare martial rule there and try to get the Mafia out of Phoenix City. So what the Mafia did to kill JFK, they planted very clear and, in hindsight, extremely ludicrously obvious evidence pointing at a communist, a seeming communist called Lee Harvey Oswald. But they also planted information that the public didn't necessarily see at the time that pointed to Fidel Castro and or Russia having manipulated Oswald into somehow having killed JFK. Now, all of that information eventually did get declassified. The CIA looked into that information because they had access to even more than the FBI did. And the guy who eventually headed the CIA, Richard Helms, concluded there was nothing to that. In fact, we can now even trace the mob-linked CIA supervisor who was the source of that information. But now, what's old is new again. Here in 2017, there are TV shows and articles today coming out saying that Oswald did it, even though, of course, Naval Intelligence, they conducted their investigation, concluded he didn't. More files we only have partially. And yet, if you watch on the History Channel, JFK Declassified, tracking Oswald with, I guess, ex-CIA agent Bob Baer and an LAPD police lieutenant, you'll hear that Oswald did it. It just assumed with no evidence. And Russia and Cuba were somehow behind it, and they breathlessly make it appear in this several-part miniseries that just concluded, I believe, yesterday, that somehow Castro and or Russia made him do it, which is all just ludicrous. And yet this is being presented, and one wonders how much of our tax dollars for the CIA are used to help those shows, but other people too. Philip Sheenan, very respected former New York Times writer, has an article on Politico and other sites, again, leaking this old, discredited Castro and or Russia.
So the net here is that LBJ, at least initially, was convinced that Oswald did it and that Oswald had connections to Castro. And this was just after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he thought that if the American people knew that Castro had hired a guy to kill Kennedy, that would force his hand. He would have to invade Cuba, and that would lead to World War III against the Soviet Union. Is that a good summary? That's
not only a great summary, but there's also one extra bit that you and I were the first people to discover that LBJ knew as well. LBJ knew that John F. Kennedy and his administration had been poised to sort of invade Cuba 10 days after JFK's trip to Dallas, that they were working with the number 3 man in Cuba, the head of the Cuban army, the founder of the Cuban army, the highest black official in Cuba, a country which was, according to our CIA at that time, of 70% African descent. that Commander Juan Almeida, number 3 man in Cuba, head of the Cuban army, was working with President Kennedy. And 10 days after Dallas, Commander Almeida was to have Fidel Castro and his brother killed. The assassination, as best we can tell from the CIA files we do have, and our interviews, would be based on a Russian or a Russian sympathizer. And then Commander Almeida would invite U.S. troops into Cuba.
We'll pick this up on the other side.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Tomorrow when the music starts, you got about 10 seconds. We'll be right back with, it's 28 minutes past the hour with more of Lamar Waldron. Stick around.